Hello, and thanks for stopping by. When it comes to connections with the film industry, London has a long and rich history. It was at 19 Park Road in Barnet, for example, way back in March 1895, that the American-born Burt Akers, along with his colleague Robert Paul, shot An Instant at Clovelly Cottage, which is widely regarded to be the first motion picture made in Britain. In other words, one which was presented as a story, as opposed to footage of everyday scenes. Although the incident at Clovelly Cottage has sadly been long lost, these few surviving frames indicate that the plot involved a woman pushing a pram. I wonder what's happened next. Just under a year later, on the 21st of February 1896, the French Lumiere brothers gave a demonstration of film at the Polytechnic Institution, now the University of Westminster, on Regent Street, to what was technically the UK's first public paying cinema audience. Rather appropriately, the building is now home to the Regent Street Cinema. As the 20th century dawned, this new art form rapidly gained popularity, leading to a swathe of cinemas, or electric theatres as they were known then, to open across the capital. A wonderful surviving example being the Electric on Portobello Road, which first opened in 1910. 1902 saw the establishment of the famous Ealing Film Studios, the oldest studio in the world to still be in business, and it was in 1889, on East Street in Walworth, that Charles Chaplin, early cinema's first true megastar, was born. Considering this impressive history, it's no surprise that countless movies have employed London as their backdrop, including everything from the early Alfred Hitchcock thriller, The Lodger, to Mary Poppins and Paddington. There are some film locations in London, though, which are very unusual indeed, in that they don't represent the city at all, being used instead to replicate far-flung war zones, American cities, and even distant planets. And in this video, I'd now like to show you 5 such places. Known as the Dimco buildings, this pair of large brick structures, which can be seen in Shepherd's Bush between the Westfield Shopping Centre and White City bus station, were built between 1898 and 1899. Their original purpose was to serve as a power station, providing electricity for the new Central London Railway, or as we now know it, the Central Line. And as such, they're the earliest surviving example of an electricity generation station built for the London Underground. This image from May 1902 provides a rare glimpse of the interior, as it appeared at the time of opening. Electricity was generated here for nearly 30 years, with operations ceasing in 1928, when responsibility for powering the Underground was transferred to the Lots Road Power Station in Chelsea. The 2 buildings were later acquired by the Dimco Machine Tools Company, hence their current name, and after that company moved out, they fell into dereliction. Fortunately, they were given listed status in September 1988 and have since been fully restored. It was also in 1988 that the Dimco buildings made their first film appearance, in the highly acclaimed Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is set in late 1940s Los Angeles, which makes the inclusion of a set of buildings off of Wood Lane in West London somewhat unusual, doesn't it? Having said that though, it mustn't be forgotten that the design of the Central London Railway, for which they originally built, was inspired by American transport infrastructure, and as such, the Dimco building certainly wouldn't look out of place in a city like New York, Chicago, or indeed LA, especially when, as seen here, a few palm trees and a fire hydrant are plonked outside. Who Framed Roger Rabbit takes place in an alternative world, where cartoon characters, or toons, happen to be physical, sentient beings who exist alongside humans, and as such the film was notable for its seamless blend of live action and animation, something which drove its star actor, the late great Bob Hoskins, half mad, as he was often required to act with thin air. In the film, the Dimco buildings had a major role. They were used to represent the Acme warehouse, where all manner of wacky cartoon equipment is stored, and it's here that the company's owner, Marvin Acme, is murdered by a falling safe. It's also in the warehouse that the movie's climax takes place, in which, in what it must be said is a very disturbing scene, The main villain, Judge Doom, played by Christopher Lloyd, is himself revealed to be a crazed, psychopathic toon. Some years later, the Dimco buildings were used to recreate something much closer to home. That's being the British Museum, as seen in 2001's The Mummy Returns. Located on the corner of Strand and Surrey Street, beside King's College, Aldwych Station is arguably the best known of London's 40-odd disused tube stations. Initially called Strand when it first opened in November 1907, it became Aldwych in 1915, despite the Strand name remaining displayed outside. The station was established by the Great Northern, Piccadilly and Brompton Railway, now the Piccadilly line, and served as a terminus of a short branch line connected to Holborn. This short stub of track was never extended, and for most of its life the branch operated as a shuttle service running to and from Holborn. Although for a period in its early history, late night services aimed at theatre goers ran from here up to King's Cross and Finsbury Park. In World War II, the tunnel between Aldwych and Holborn was requisitioned for storing a number of museum treasures, the most notable items held here being the Elgin marbles. After reopening, the branch line remained in service until the 1990s, when it was decided that the high cost of replacing the antiquated lifts at Aldwych couldn't be justified, and so the station finally closed to passengers on the 1st of September 1994. Despite being closed for almost 30 years, Aldwych still sees its fair share of activity in the guise of a film set, being a handy place for TV and film producers to employ whenever they need to film a scene on the tube. If you fancy hiring the place out though, it'll cost you. The current fee is reported to be £3,000 per hour. Filming at Aldwych is in fact nothing new. Even when it was still in service, film crews utilised the station, as because trains only ran during peak times, there was plenty of downtime available. As such, Aldwych has appeared in many films and TV shows over the years, including Deathline, The Craze, V for Vendetta, and Stan and Ollie, in which the surface building was opened up and dressed to look as it would have done in the 1950s. All of these examples though are of course set in London, but in this video we're concentrating on scenes which aren't set in the city, and so this is where Superman 4: The Quest for Peace comes in. Released in 1987, Superman 4 marked a lackluster end to the series starring Christopher Reeve, which had started so promisingly in 1978. Although the earlier Superman films had proved immensely popular and had massive budgets, with Marlon Brando famously being paid $7 million for a mere 7 minutes of screen time, and that's in 1978 money, remember, Superman 4 was a troubled production made with extremely limited funds. As part of this cost-cutting exercise, Aldwych Station was used in a scene to represent the Metropolis subway, the Metro City Transit as it's labelled, despite the London Underground looking rather different to typical American subway systems. This involved Aldwych being rebranded as Metropolis South Station, complete with advertising displays specific to the USA. Most notably this one featuring Smokey Bear, the famous character who appears in campaigns warning the American public about the dangers of forest fires. A fellow dressed as an American cop has also been placed in the scene to give it added authenticity. In the scene itself, Clark Kent misses a train, which Lois Lane happens to be travelling on. Then, as the subway, which is bound for 4th Avenue, rattles along, the driver collapses, causing the train to speed out of control. Fortunately, as Clark isn't on board, he's able to change into Superman and fly into the train's path, halting it before it crashes. Now, as great as he is, it must be said that in real life, Superman wouldn't even be needed in the event of such an incident, as all London Underground trains are fitted with the so-called dead man's handle, a fail-safe lever which a driver must hold onto at all times. If the driver does have the misfortune to pass out, their release of the lever will bring the train to an automatic stop. The train used here, by the way, is an example of the 1973 tube stock, Unit 891, and it's still around on the network today. It's now used as a rail adhesion train. As corny as this scene is, it does give a good insight into how Aldwych appeared towards the end of its life as an active station. Of particular note is the tiled zigzag pattern running along the platform wall, several other similar examples of which can be seen at other stations on the Piccadilly line, such as this yellow one at Covent Garden. These patterns, each of which is slightly different, were originally intended to help illiterate passengers, which was a lot more commonplace in the early 20th century, to help identify each station. On a quick side note, Superman 4 also made use of another British station, this one being Milton Keynes Central, which, with its striking glass front and a large public square, was used as a stand-in for the United Nations Plaza. The former Acton Lane Power Station, originally known as Willesden Power Station, was located a short walk from Holston train station, opposite to the Grand Junction Arms pub, and the rather delicious smelling McVitie's Biscuit Factory. This map, which dates from 1915, shows the layout of the old power plant. As you can see, to the south it was bordered by the Grand Union Canal, and to the east by the Dudding Hill Freight Line, which rather charmingly still uses semaphore signals. Today, the site is still an important industrial area. It's now home to the large Willesden electricity substation, which hums away in the background. The power station once located here first opened back in 1899 and was taken over in 1925 by the London Power Company, who would also go on to establish Battersea Power Station. Acton Lane Power Station would go on to boast 3 cooling towers, which dominated the area, and you can see part of the complex here, in the background to the 1982 Madness music video, Our House, which was filmed a short distance away on Stevenson Street. Acton Lane finally closed on the 31st of October 1983, the same day Battersea Power Station was also fully shut down, and in the wake of its closure, it would go on to provide sets for 2 major films of the 80s, the first being Aliens, which was released in 1986. The sequel to the classic 1979 sci-fi horror film Alien, which was filmed on the outskirts of London at Shepperton and Elstree Studios, Aliens was directed by James Cameron, who'd firmly established himself 2 years previously with The Terminator. In Aliens, Acton Lane Power Station was used to create Hadley's Hope, a small mining and terraforming colony on a distant moon known as LV-426, which becomes overrun with the terrifying and practically indestructible alien creatures, leading a group of colonial marines on a doomed mission to investigate the site. For James Cameron, Acton Lane Power Station, with its industrial look and many raised gangways, offered the perfect set. Although apparently he had a tough time on the shoot, other parts of which were filmed at Pinewood Studios, just outside London, as his blood pressure was sent through the roof by the British crew's insistence on taking regular tea breaks. The second film made here was Tim Burton's Batman, released in 1989. In this movie, Acton Lane appears as the Axis Chemicals plant, a business front for the Gotham mob boss Carl Grissom. It's here, following a betrayal and police shootout, that the gangster Jack Napier, played by Jack Nicholson, plunges into a vat of chemicals, the resulting injuries of which lead to his face being contorted into a frozen grin, and thus Batman's arch-nemesis, the Joker, is born. A while ago on this channel, I made a video entitled London's Lost Beach, which was about a man-made stretch of sand on the Thames, which for several decades in the 20th century was open to the public just outside the Tower of London. I'll link that to video below in case you missed it. This wasn't London's only beach though. There's another one, which is still very much open, in the capital's northwestern suburbs. Ruislip Lido. The roots of Ruislip Lido date all the way back to 1811, when this large lake was created as a feeder reservoir for the Grand Junction Canal. The land used was purchased from King's College, Cambridge, with the project being overseen by the genius Scottish engineer John Rennie. The lake became a Lido and entertainment complex in the 1930s, and in World War II, RAF crews were trained here in water survival techniques. Ruislip Lido is also famous for its wonderful miniature railway, which first opened in 1945 and now runs for just over a mile around the perimeter of the lake. Today, the Lido is a relaxing place, popular with families and a nice place for a walk and a spot of bird watching. So it may come as some surprise then to hear that the lake here was once used in a disaster movie. The film in question was 1958's A Night to Remember, which documents the infamous tale of the Titanic, which sunk on that fated night back in April 1912. It was on Ruislip, Lido's lake, that shots of the lifeboats, which are identical to those used on the real Titanic, were filmed, along with footage of passengers splashing about in the water. These scenes were recorded on various nights between November and February, so it would have been pretty chilly in there, although nowhere near as cold, of course, as the freezing cold waters of the North Atlantic. Shots of the large Titanic model sinking, meanwhile, were completed in a water tank at Pinewood Studios. Ruislip Lido was also used in two classic 1960s films, these being The Young Ones and The Knack and How to Get It, as well as Confessions from a Holiday Camp, which came out in 1977. Once located on the northern shore of the Thames, in the easternmost stretch of London, the Beckton gasworks were a massive industrial site, which, established by the Gaslight and Coke Company, first began operating in 1870. The complex would ultimately grow to occupy 500 acres, and at their height, the works employed some 4,500 people. Over the years, the vast amount of toxic waste produced here led to the creation of a huge slag heap, which grew so lofty, locals jokingly referred to it as the Beckton Helps. And indeed it was so tall that in 1988 it was converted into an artificial ski slope, opened by Princess Diana no less, which remained in use until 2001. Beckton gasworks themselves closed in 1976, and little physical evidence of them survives today. Until recently there was a gasometer at this spot, although even that's now been demolished. Walking around the area though, known as Galleon's Reach, it is clear that something very big once existed here, as evidenced by large swathes of grassy land, which remain fenced off and plastered with danger signs, presumably because they have yet to be decontaminated, and the various patches of weed-strewn concrete, which can be glimpsed here and there. This all makes for something that's a rare thing nowadays in London, a broad, undeveloped open space, which, despite the presence of a retail park, and the large Docklands Lights railway depot, still manages to feel eerily empty. Post-apocalyptic even. For a good few years following its closure though, the many buildings and bits of infrastructure which had formed the Beckton gasworks remained in place, rusting away and crumbling into dereliction. And it was in this state that they provided the ideal movie set. One of the earliest scenes shot amongst, or rather, in this case, above the ruins, can be seen in the opening sequence to 1981's For Your Eyes Only, in which Roger Moore's incarnation of James Bond finds himself in a helicopter which has been remotely hijacked by his arch-enemy, Ernest Blofeld. Needless to say, 007 quickly turns the tables, regaining control of the chopper and using it to scoop up Blofeld and chuck him down a chimney. In 1985, the site appeared in Max Headroom, 20 Minutes into the Future, a dystopian drama which introduced the world to Matt Frewer's famous wisecracking and supposedly computer-generated talking head. And in 1987, the ruins were used in Empire of the Sun, which starred a young Christian Bale to depict war-torn Shanghai. It was also in 1987 that the old Beckton gasworks made what was arguably their most famous appearance, that being in Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, Full Metal Jacket. Based on a novel called The Short Timers, and the name of the film referring to a type of bullet casing, Full Metal Jacket is set during the Vietnam War, which you'd think would mean it was filmed in a tropical environment. However, despite having once owned a pilot's license, Stanley Kubrick held a great aversion to water flying, a fear born out of the fact that a friend of his had been killed in a plane crash, and as such he had no desire to take the project abroad. A New Yorker by birth, Kubrick had resided in the UK since 1961. His home was at Childwickbury Manor near St Albans in Hertfordshire, and as such, Full Metal Jacket was filmed entirely in England. The film is very much a work of two halves. The first section deals with the brutal training regime which United States Marine Corps recruits are put through, and is therefore set at the Marine Corps Recruits Depot, which in real life is located on Parris Island in South Carolina, Following the film, Basingbourne Barracks in Cambridgeshire and a set in Enfield, North London were used. The second half takes place in Vietnam itself, in around 1968 at the height of the conflict, and this is where the old Beckton gasworks came in, being dressed to resemble a war zone. This involved importing over 100 palm trees, all of which had to be maintained and watered, and as the works were due to be bulldozed anyway, the crew were given free rein to blow up buildings and set the ruins ablaze. Consequently, many intense scenes were filmed here by Kubrick, which together represent some of the most profound anti-war imagery ever committed to film. Of particular note are the scenes towards the end of the grim story, which deal with the fate of a young female Vietnamese sniper, followed by a view of the film's central character, Private Joker, played by Matthew Modine, as he marches with his comrades across a darkening, fire-strewn landscape just before the credits begin to roll. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at some of London's more unusual film locations. I'd love to hear your own thoughts on these movies and places. Which ones are your favourites? And are there any other similar unlikely sites you can think of? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. Thank you so much to all of you who support my channel with your kind words, likes and shares. I couldn't do this without you. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus of course it would be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well and please be sure to stay tuned.